Hi. If you're thinking of growing cut flowers, then you might think, well, why bother, because I'm really rubbish at arranging those flowers. And I'm here to say, actually, it doesn't matter, because generally your flowers are going to speak for themselves. If you can grow beautiful flowers, no matter how you arrange them, then they're going to be fantastic anyway. And people will be grateful for them if you're giving them away. So that's nothing to worry about. But if it at all concerns you, then I thought I would cover the basics of what you need to know for flowers. So there are basics to floral arrangements. Me personally, I generally create just handheld arrangements to go into vases, so I can put vases throughout the house. They don't need to be anything special, and for those arrangements there is a general formula for creating them. So if you want to get basic, then really you're looking at three things. You're looking at your focal flower, your filler flower, and foliage, and that together creates variety in your arrangement. So when you're looking for a focal flower, you're thinking of generally the thing that is going to be the most eye-catching. It's going to be the thing that people say wow. So generally, if you were buying flower, it would be the big, most expensive flower. So you could think dahlias, roses, maybe phlox, alliums. Whilst they're individual, they could still be the focal flower, especially if they were the bigger headed varieties. Sweet William, I think, a focal flower, and of course you have roses. So anything that is going to provide the wow factor. Along with those, I would say things like lupins or snapdragons. They look quite sad there. Snapdragons, or anything that's going to provide that wow. So that's your focal. Filler is just something that gives a bit of space around the focal flower. So achillea provides space. If you imagine that if you've got three of your expensive focal flowers in the arrangement, and then pad it out with a bit of colour from achillea or feverfew, or even, that is also Sweet William, that could be classed as a filler as well. A bit of Sweet Rocket, anything that's just going to provide a bit of space that's going to go around that focal flower. And to add to that is the foliage. So again, it's just adding more texture to the arrangement. So generally when you think of foliage, you're thinking of green. So you could have, this is blackcurrant leaves, you could have mint, you've got cerinthe, because this is mainly green and it's got a beautiful bluey green leaf. The flowers are fairly insignificant in reality. You could have something fancy, like a fancy grass. So really, something that is not trying to detract from any of the others. They're just adding a bit of depth. So the filler has a bit of colour that blends in with your focal, but doesn't. It gives space around the focal, but doesn't, and supports it, but it doesn't take away the beauty of the focal. And the focal is your big wow. So they're your basics that you need to look at. So if you do nothing else, and you plant your garden full of a third foliage, a third filler, and third focal, then you will have arrangements to die for. So that's great. If you wanted to create something that was a bit more fancy, then your foliage then expands into something that may be a bit more structural, such as adding more woody stems. So you could have curly willow, or your more shrub-like structures. You can have those in your normal vase as well, but those structures just add something more to a more fancy arrangement. So if you're doing a pedestal vase, for instance, then that would cover that. Well, you could break it down even further. So if you're still not sure with foliage, filler and focal to make an arrangement, you could break it down a little bit further and create elements to that to provide interest in an arrangement. And then it doesn't really matter so much about the colours and how you're blending it in. It's more because you've got so much interest in the bouquet, then it will all look glorious together. So again, you still have the focal, so you still want something that is going to create the wow. So whether that's alliums, roses, phlox, you can then add a spike. So generally your focal in this context will be something more rounded. So rounded heads like peonies, dahlias, that sort of thing. So you know what your focal is when you're looking at it. Sunflowers, something big and something to look at. Next you would add in a spike. So the spike, again, in the old way, a spike would generally, I would have thought, be a focal flower. But that spike just adds a bit of interest into it. So you're creating something that is of a different texture. Let me go here. So you're creating variety in that bouquet. Then you're looking at disc type structures. So in that context, I would say that Achillea, with its round heads like that, are discs. So whereas it was filler in the old structure, it's a disc in this structure. So that would add into there. You could also add in another Sweet William into that mix, because that's a disc shape, so that could go in. And then we have filler. I tried to think of a different name for that, but really I could just think of filler. So it's other structures that add a bit of something. So they could be more daisy-like flowers, so that adds something different. Sweet rocket, again, adds something different. And within that filler element, then you would add in your foliage. So that could also be classed as filler, whatever that ends up being. So we could put in the filler. I've no idea whether this is going to work together, but we'll pull in the filler there. And the final thing to add in, if you want to be more granular about or formulaic about your arrangements, is some air. So it's to add openness into the bouquet and add a little bit of frivolity, really, and a bit of pizzazz, something different. So the fancy grasses could go in. You could have a bit of geum that hovers over the side. You could have some vine with all of its twizzly sections. Now, I'm not saying that is an arrangement, but all of those elements, if you see that I could add a bit more in there, that would all pad out and make a wonderful arrangement. Let me stick it in a bit more. A spike to add into there. Add this spike. So I am really not thinking about the colours, because there's no way I would put this gaudy yellow with this, but actually, does it matter? Let's add in a phlox. Add in the allium. This is a really spiky rose, so I'm not trying to touch it too much. Add in a rose. So at this point I am not really telling you how to form a hand-tied bouquet. It's just really about adding in something. Now this, whilst it looks dreadful at this point in time, it brings in the oranges and the pinks and the yellows even. So putting that in there just brings it all together. So I don't know what that looks like in reality. it's not too bad given the combination that I've got. It really was just a random selection from the garden, but it's not too bad. But it's because it's got those variety of shapes. It's not just the same thing, the same shape, the same colour and the same texture all in one arrangement. It's a multitude of colours and shapes and sizes all mingling together, and if you do that, then you will have a good arrangement no matter what your skill level is or the plants that you have available. Hopefully that helps and gives you a bit of confidence. If it's just going in your house, who cares? The smell enough from some of these plants will brighten up your room, even if it's shabbily arranged. And actually, with experience, the more you do it, the better you will get, the better you will see how things fit together. So don't be afraid. Who cares? Just do it. Just go ahead and do it. If you want to start a cutting patch so you can get experienced in this, then check out this video here, and that will show you the basics of seed sowing so that you can get started and get this flower garden up and running.